Good evening, everyone. My name is Dwayne DeFore, and I'm the Interim Executive Director for the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. I'm excited to welcome you all here today for our first ever BARCC Forum, Conversations for Understanding, Healing, and Social Change. The new event series hosted by BARCC will explore the topics of sexual violence within the intersection of other major social issues such as race, gender, immigration, economic stability, mental health, etc. As always, we aim to center survivor voices in these conversations and honor their lived experience. Conversations like these are important to me on a personal and professional level. Early in my career, I actually worked as a medical advocate, and I also did hotline work, and I saw firsthand the impact sexual violence has on all aspects of our lives. For the past 25 years, in fact, I've dedicated my work to addressing these intersecting issues, such as anti-racism, redefining masculinity, restorative justice, gender violence prevention, consent, sexual health, etc. And I'm so grateful to be joined this evening by all of you who understand the critical nature of this work and appreciate your ongoing support for survivors everywhere. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our esteemed guests who will be leading tonight's conversation. Please join me in welcoming Grace Toulousan and Latoya Edwards. Real background, Grace Toulousan is the author of The Body Papers, a New York Times Editor's Choice selection, the winner in nonfiction for the 2020 Massachusetts Book Awards, and the winner of the Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing. Currently, Toulousan is the Fannie Hurst Writer in Residence at Brandeis University, and I invite you all to stick around after the program concludes for a chance to meet with Grace and ask her any questions you may have. Latoya Edwards speaks to hundreds of thousands of people every morning from the Needham studios of NBC 10 Boston and NECM. The Emmy award-winning anchor also hosts This is New England, a Sunday morning community program on NBC 10 Boston. Latoya is a native of Dorchester, and she holds a degree in broadcast journalism from Emerson College, and she is also a former Miss Massachusetts. She began her career as a news writer for WBZ 1030 AM radio before moving to broadcast television, and she joined NBC 10 Boston NECM in 2005. A trusted voice and leader, Edwards has the gift for connecting with our audiences and the community by listening and speaking from her heart to bring into focus important issues and topics, and you will see that on display tonight. Grace and Latoya, thank you and welcome. And we are excited to have you with us this evening.
Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I'm so happy to be here this evening, so happy to be with all you. Thank you for being a part of this special and a really important conversation. And I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce you to officially Grace Toulousan. I can't wait to dive into our conversation. And we're gonna do things in a special way as well. Grace is actually gonna read an excerpt from her memoir, The Body Papers. Grace, we love you. Grace, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Latoya. It's an honor to be in conversation with you and to be here with BARCC, which I've been paying attention to probably my whole life. And it's incredible for me to be here tonight. So thank you. So I'll read from The Body Papers. I'll read a couple of excerpts, about 5 minutes. For most of my life, my faith in God was steady. But during this time, I did not feel connected to anything, including God. To be without God's light was another kind of hell. I preferred to be asleep, but when I opened my eyes to the darkness of my bedroom, the window shades always drawn, before I raised my head from my pillow, I started my childhood habit of praying, speaking to Jesus first, and expressing gratitude for another day of life. But during this depressive episode and others like it that followed, I was deeply disappointed to find myself still alive. Even if I had wanted to talk to Jesus, my line to God had been cut. It is hard to describe nothingness and the pain of hopelessness and endless despair, but that is what I felt. As a girl, I had grown up with a real fear of the fires of hell. I gave my weekly confession to the priest at the confession booth and every night prayed to be forgiven for my sins, even for the ones I had forgotten or did not realize were sins. I did not want to die with a sin on my soul and be vanquished to hell or languish in purgatory. I came to the conclusion that hell was not hot, but cold. It was not an active, fiery landscape, but this, me under my musty and damp bed covers, alone and without faith that there was anything good in this world to stay alive for. I'll read another brief passage. During the years the abuse was happening, I knew implicitly how dangerous it was to tell on my grandfather. A story could get you killed. Whether you were the person the story was about or even the storyteller. My parents would often tell me to be careful of what I said because even the walls have ears. You could not take a story back once it had been told. Even though I didn't know the precarious immigration situation my family was in, I didn't trust the authorities, law enforcement, or the justice system. I was afraid that once the story was out of my control, anything could happen. A rumor could destroy an entire clan. You would be shunned and no one would want to do business with you. I knew that my story was not mine alone, but that it would impact my blood relations too. It was the only way I could feel powerful at the time, to know that I had the power to tell a story and to choose to withhold it. Okay, so I'm going to read from a section that I very rarely read from. It's not explicit, but I only read it in spaces where there's other, I'm certain there's other survivors, and I'm talking to a particular audience. This is what happened and happened and happened. I was 7 and he was 70. I was 8 and he was 71. I was 9 and he was 72. I was 10 and he was 73. I was 11 and he was 74. I was 12 and he was 75. I was 13 and he was 76. There is no paper trail to document what happened to my body, and I don't remember all of what happened. The sexual assaults spanned 7 years with such consistency and frequency that I was not present for all of it. I doubt I'd still be alive if I hadn't found a way to escape. Thank you.
Oh, I wish I could literally hug you. Feel my hug coming through right now to you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. We're taking a breath and we're now going to dive into this conversation because, as you said, this audience in particular, you're in community right now and it's such a safe place to talk and you've written something that needs to be shared and shared again. So let's spread the word and really spread the message. Can you talk about how your religion and your legal status impacted your ability to get help for the sexual abuse you experienced?
Sure. So I grew up Catholic. I was at church every Sunday, all the religious holidays. There was even a time early in my childhood where I would go to confession on Saturdays in order to be eligible to take communion on Sundays. And we even had meat-free Fridays. So we were like very Catholic. We really followed, everything. And, I didn't really understand and process how my identities as a Catholic and also as someone who was undocumented, how that impacted my ability to speak and feel comfortable getting help, both, even just telling my parents what had happened to me and what was going on. It really, those kinds of, it's an incredible question that actually no one has asked me before in the many, many interviews and events I've done. And so, I'm grateful for the question, but it's something that I definitely worked out later and understood later. And I think that, as a Catholic in particular, that was, a lot of things were reinforced, whether I was meant to take in these ideas or not. Some of the ideas that I took away from growing up Catholic was that there was a hierarchy of men who were in charge. The Pope was next to God. He's infallible. Then there's the cardinals. Then there's the priests. And we had a parish priest. And my parents and lots of other people were very, respectful and reverential to this person. And so was I. And so I learned that there's, we should be especially listening to men who had power, and priests were powerful. And, I listened to the lessons that he taught me that were taught throughout the Catholic Church about honoring your mother and father. I also learned about suffering. And whether I'm supposed to learn this or not, in my brain, I just thought, I'm meant to suffer. And the suffering that I experience is actually for good. Like I can, dedicate my suffering to the souls in purgatory. Like I made up a whole story in my head about why it was okay for me as a child to suffer. So, I'm not saying all Catholics take this away from their experiences, but it's what I had put together. And so it was a way of helping me endure what was happening. I'm a storyteller, I write, and I think that we use narrative to cope. And sometimes the narrative is not correct, it's messed up, but it's a way that we cope. And so I think that's how Catholicism impacted me and my ability to tell. And in terms of being undocumented, I found out later about the time that I told my parents. And it also had another silencing aspect because I was really afraid of anybody finding out. We did not go to the police. We did not pursue anything legal because we were afraid to interface with the legal system. Because if they found out about this, then of course they would find out about our legal status, and that would put my entire family in jeopardy. Mm-hmm. So I really felt a lot of weight on me, not only from the abuse, but from structural and societal impacts as well.
I mean, I'm sitting here and I have so many questions for you. Believe me, a long list here, Grace. But I'm going to veer off the list a little bit because hindsight is 20/20. But when I think about the relationship that you had with your family and the responsibility that you carried at such a young age, how about the apologies? How about it's hard because your parents just wanted, your family wanted to keep you here and keep you safe, and in their mind, keep you in this country is better than enduring. I get it, especially protecting the fact that you were not, your legal status was not solid. So the apologies, and how does that go right now? Because there has to be a feeling inside of you, even if it's not been voiced, that you need that apology, you need that sorry from somebody.
Yeah. I'll talk about my immediate family, but then also there's other ways. Like if we can't get what we need from the people around us or the people that we want it from, I think we should seek it from the places we can. Mm-hmm. And so, when in the immediate aftermath, my parents did apologize. I can say, it didn't really mean that much to me. I was like in the midst of all this trauma, and I think they were in their own, way too. But during the process that it took to publish my book, which probably took about 1.5 years from start to finish, it was this opportunity for my parents to find a way to apologize or atone. I didn't ask for them to do that. I didn't even expect them to. But especially my mother, there was a way that she began to be almost in service to me and this book. Like she did all kinds of labor to help set up events for me, to go with me. She's been to almost every event, like physically and then also virtually. So, and she shows up. My father has shown up to some of the events. And there's this way that I feel that was an opportunity for them to show their remorse, as opposed to just saying the words. My mother and my father, to some extent, showed up and sat through these events where I was talking about the impact that this kind of neglect had on me, and what, I'm not going to hear it from my grandfather. He died, a long time ago. And I'm not going to hear it from my father's siblings and extended family. And I just have to let go of that. But I do have to say that even strangers, even people I've met in recovery, like in support groups and in women's center spaces, in other places, even at readings, like those are meaningful to hear people, to have witnesses. Even though it happened a long time ago, there's a way that experiences like this reverberate, they feel almost present, and to have people acknowledge and accept and hear my story, something I wasn't able to talk about, it is meaningful. So for people who can't get an apology from those they most wish it from, I think you can find it in other kinds of places and in other people.
I love that. Can you share how you learned about your family's history of violence and abuse and how finding out just that piece of information impacted you?
It was very important for me to find out my family's history with violence. One of the aspects of abuse, especially as a child, for me is a feeling of isolation. I am the only one. I am singular and strange. And to find out that, no, I'm within a long line of trauma and cycles of violence, both familial and personal, as well as colonial, because the Philippines, all my relatives have lived through generations of colonialism by the Spanish and the U.S. and then also war, World War II and other wars. All of these events have impacted the personal, like have like filtered their ways into the family. And so when I saw myself within that context, I didn't feel alone and strange, and I could understand what had gone on. Rather than blame myself for something I did to cause abuse, which of course is not right, I realized that my father had been physically abused and mentally abused by his own parents, and his parents were also within a context of war and hunger and poverty and extreme violence, cycles that happened over and over again. And when I learned that, I was determined to find out ways to interrupt that cycle as much as possible. And I was really lucky to be born when I was, and to come across the very important work that mostly women were doing around trauma. Dr. Judith Herman and her work around post-traumatic stress disorder, and all the feminists and other people working together to talk about rape, sexual assault, child sexual abuse, these things that people have denied existing. It was very important, the work that they've done, like it impacted me directly. So it was helpful for me to understand the context in which I was born into.
And I love the fact that you talk about how fortunate you are, because I think part of it is, your story is brutal in a lot of ways. But there are also, you find joy, and you find reasons to have gratitude in your heart and to offer grace. And so I love hearing you talk about that. You share how the abuse and the trauma you suffered as a child affected every aspect of your life. I mean, again, this memoir is something so powerful, including your relationships, your mental health, your relationship with your own body. Can you talk about those impacts and how they changed you as you grew into adulthood?
Yes. It explained, once I started doing more reflective work on what had happened to me, and reading about trauma and talking with other survivors and being in community with all kinds of people, I understood why I was thinking and acting the ways that I was. I really started to question why I was suffering so much. In terms of mental health, I experienced a lot of depression and anxiety. With my body, I was trying to control the shape and size of it a lot by exercising too much, eating too little. And there's ways that those kinds of body shapes and behaviors are reinforced and in our society, whether people have abuse histories or not. Mm-hmm. And so I had to find my way to people who were actively trying to challenge that, and to think about, like, why do we talk about our bodies in these ways? Like, who does that serve? And how can we be strong and healthy and enjoy our bodies and be inside of our bodies, and not be responding to some kind of, exterior idea about what we should look like. I've also realized that it impacts my relationships and my ability to trust people. I've been working so hard at trying to heal for many years, and yet I come to these potholes where I realize, oh, this is a trauma response. For example, around friendship, like I've been friends with people for decades, and I can feel this kind of barrier or distance between us around trust. Like I don't want them to hurt me. And there's ways that I withhold myself and keep myself back because I don't want them to hurt me. And I think, and I know that's directly, related to the betrayal with my grandfather, because, the way I understood my grandfather is there's a daytime and nighttime grandfather. And the daytime grandfather, he's like, he taught me to garden. He would build things with me. He gave me attention. That was very nice for me. And then there was this nighttime one that was, utterly destructive. And so, there's ways that I understand relationships that reverberate. And I wish it didn't, because I can trust. Like, how long is it going to take for me to trust my friends? They show up for me. They haven't given me a reason not to trust them. And yet I feel that kind of barrier.
Grace, your resilience is literally palpable. I mean, and when I hear, it's so funny that you say that you have this barrier, because I'm sitting here thinking the whole time while you're speaking, and I think the people who are watching this, they're saying that, she's so vulnerable. I mean, I don't know if you, and, people you don't see yourself how the world sees you clearly. But I mean, the fact that you show up and can offer this, I mean, I remember when you were reading the last passage that you shared with us, and you took a moment and you closed your eyes and you said you usually don't share these words because unless you're in a company that has experienced sexual abuse. And I thought to myself, how is she going to have the strength to continue? I know it's been years, but it was during your foundational time that this happened. So it could have destroyed you internally, and you could have imploded and not been able to get off the floor. And you haven't. You are here. You are present. I have to acknowledge that and ask you how you are able to share those words, how you can show up and be present.
I think, I know I've said this before, but I just think I'm really lucky to have the people I have in my life. I've met other survivors in various groups, and I can see ways that they've been incredibly unlucky or not as privileged as I am. I mean, I do enjoy a lot of privileges as someone who was able to access higher education. My parents also were educated, and there's just, there's aspects of my identity that I have had no control over. The people that I've met in my life, like, I feel, how did I even meet them? They're so incredible, and I'm lucky, and they've been so essential to my ability to feel joy and heal in the ways that I can. So I don't know. I mean, Can
you take credit for you? Can you take credit that there's people, like my mother, she passed away in February, and I think that she's made of steel. There was something about her that she took, she never drank a thing in her life, never drank alcohol, but it was something internally. There's some type of fortitude that you have. And so can you receive that message as well, that there's something about you?
I can. When I was thinking about speaking with you today, I was remembering who I was before it happened. Like, started happening when I was 7. Mm-hmm. And, I can remember who I was. And I think my life is like always trying to get back to that person of who I was. Because I think that's who I was. Like, when I was born and I came out, and people, when I meet people who knew me before I was 7, relatives who I haven't seen since I was a child, the person that they would reflect back and describe to me, it's like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that person who I was back before things happened. And I'm really, I'm a writer, so I'm in a creative field, and that is actually like being like a child. I think, is part of what is helpful for me as a creative person, trying to get back to that place where I'm not afraid to speak and say what I think about the world and to make things and write stories. And so I'm constantly like trying to be back in relationship with that self before age 7.
You know, you talk about that tender moment, and maybe it's that, it will resonate with people in this community who may have gone through a similar experience, or even people who haven't, who have little ones. Like I have a 5-year-old son, and I'm sitting here listening to you right now. And what's infuriating about, there's so many things about your story that that make me angry. But I think for me, when you talked about the night grandpa and the dayside grandpa, is that the innocence of a child, and that you were willing to, even after you suffered clearly the nightside grandfather, you would still try again to have that dayside grandfather. You would still suffer that horror, but then still be willing to go garden, and how do you make sense of that? Because, you didn't run away and cower at 8. I mean, yeah, not that you necessarily could have, but, how did you make sense of that? I guess maybe even looking back now as an adult.
Yeah. I think it's about having choices. And I think, we are as children so powerless. And we start to get a little bit more power as we get older. Hopefully, we recognize our power, and then eventually, I did recognize my power at age 12 when I made it stop. But it took me a long time because this was my reality, and I had no choice but to make a story about how this all worked. If I understood as an adult, I when I encounter pictures of myself at that time, and I let myself sit in the gravity of what, a 7, 8, 9-year-old was holding, it's like unbelievable to me because it's too much. But I think it speaks to this human spirit and the human desire to survive. People have survived all kinds of things because we have to. We have to survive. And I think that's the creative part of our lives, of our bodies, our brains, like that know more than us. Like there's my conscious self, and then there's a part of myself that is fighting every minute, whatever I'm facing, to keep going, to have dignity, and to keep going.
Yes. You later learned that cancer runs in your family. Can you talk a bit about your decision to undergo preventive surgeries to remove your breasts, your ovaries, and how that decision was colored by your past experience as a survivor of sexual assault?
Thank you. I mean, it meant that for maybe it was about 1.5 years of the process when I was deciding to have those preventive surgeries, it meant a lot of focus on my, these parts of my body that I generally don't want to talk about and don't want to even think about, because it's also the parts of my body that were, that were assaulted physically. And so, but I had to talk about them in a different way, because if I was going to have the benefit of the science that people devoted their lives to discovering the BRCA genetic mutation, if I was going to benefit from that knowledge, then, I had to face it and to think about and talk about with doctors and other people about my breasts and ovaries and what I was going to do with them. And the other thing that happened is that my older sister had breast cancer at 33, and so I helped out with her 1-year-old while she was going through treatment. I was with her during treatments, and she kept telling me, she's my older sister. The word is ate in Tagalog. She's my ate. She always was trying to look out for me. And she taught me how to tie my shoes. She taught me how to do all kinds of things. And so she was telling me, she's like, you don't want to wait for breast cancer. If you can prevent this, you do not want to go through this. Like, this is bad. And for about 5 years after she was done with treatment, she lived in fear that she was, the breast cancer was going to come back somewhere else. And so she really convinced me, as well as my conversations with other people who had done the surgeries. And so I had to trust. Trust is something that got kind of broken for me, but I really had to trust other people and go forward and do it. And I can tell you, like, it's been about 10 years since the surgeries. I'm glad, like, this is I'm not afraid of breast and ovarian cancer. And it's not that bad. Like, the living with, the plastic surgery and and not having my ovaries, like, when there's two bad decisions that you have to choose from, like, you're going to want to choose the less bad thing. And so this is the less bad thing. And it's really not that bad.
That's powerful. So, you talk about your husband and there's so many survivors of sexual assault, sexual abuse that cannot marry. They cannot have meaningful relationships. How did you manage that?
I think one of the alarm bells for me is when I did start dating as a teenager. One of the people I was drawn to did not treat me well. And so that was an alarm bell for me. And I just thought, I do not want to live the rest of my life choosing people like this. And so I had to do a lot of work and really think about, like, why do I want to be with somebody who makes me feel out of control with how desperate I am for their attention and their love? Like, I can't live the rest of my life like that. It's so destabilizing. And so I had to do a lot of work and learn to be friends with guys and men, and then slowly start to choose people that were who seemed to genuinely have my best interest at heart. And so I think that's who I ended up with. And even so, it's still hard sometimes, like, to trust. And I think I still ask, like, are you sure you still love me? Like, why would you love me? Like, what, and I think, and I'm glad that I feel comfortable enough to have those kinds of conversations, because there is a part of me that felt so unlovable and didn't know why anyone would want to be with me. But I'm lucky to have married who I married. And he also does a lot of work himself, reflecting and his own, journey with mental health and trying to make sense of his life. So I think I've married the right person.
Oh, clearly, to recognize that you are a gem. So I love that. And I know that, speaking of your husband, you and your husband, you returned to the Philippines to visit your family's ancestral home. Can you talk about that decision to make that trip and how that helped you reclaim a lost piece of yourself?
Yes. I mean, one of the experiences of immigration is loss. Of course, you gain a lot by going somewhere else. And I've had conversations with my father, thanking him for bringing us to the United States. Like, I am glad I'm here. But that also means there's some loss. And so when my husband and I went to the Philippines for about 6 months, it was incredibly transformative. First of all, I was around Filipinos. Like, I'm used to being the only person, only Filipino, only Asian American, only immigrant, only person of color, whatever way you want to say it. I'm used to that experience. And so to step into a space where there are a lot of Filipinos here, like, that was incredible, and all kinds of Filipinos. Like, Filipinos, we don't even speak the same language. That's how many Filipinos are around me. And that was just, to be there was really great. There's like a part of me that unclenched and relaxed. I didn't have to explain my foreignness, which is sort of ironic because I was read as foreign. Like, they immediately knew I was American. I tried to dye my hair. I bought clothes there. I tried to pretend I was Filipino. No, people read me as American right away. It was my body language. It was the way I spoke English. It was all kinds of stuff. But I did feel like I reclaimed something that was lost. And it was an experience of being at home. And we ate the food, the particular kind of tropical sun made my skin a certain color. I mean, there's just all kinds of ways that being in the Philippines, reshaped me. But also I never felt so American. It's this very complicated experience where I never was American as I was until I was in the Philippines, in another country.
Oh, I totally get that. And, I have to tell you, and again, for people who are listening, just a reminder, if you don't have the memoir right now, Grace Talusan's memoir, The Body Papers, is like no other. And so I would encourage you to please read it from cover to cover. Let's dive in. Let's go a higher theme a little bit here. How has COVID-19, in your mind, exacerbated the impact of trauma around sexual violence, mental health, especially within the intersection of race, economic justice, and identity?
Thank you. The Filipino American community has been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. I believe Filipino nurses have died at a huge rate, much higher than other populations. And so this, my community in particular has been impacted, but more generally around trauma and these, factors of race and economic justice and identity. Part of the way we protect ourselves from the pandemic is by isolating. And that's the language we even use is isolation. And so we have to be contained in spaces where some people are experiencing intimate violence. That is the space that they live in, is exactly the place where the worst things are happening to them. And so that's where they are. And it has very much exacerbated these kinds of issues, unless people have been able to get themselves out of them. But I think that is very hard, especially because people are also losing their jobs. They've been impacted economically by this long crisis that we're having. And so I think it's only exacerbated things. I have lots of privileges, and even I know that, I never have sunk lower, in my adult life than these past few months. Like, it definitely, I was able to recognize what was happening, but all the things in my life that keep me going, being with people, being with my students, doing my work, being in nature, like all these things, I wasn't able to do. And so even with all the privileges I enjoy, it still impacted me a lot. So it's been really rough. And I know that we're trying to come out of it with vaccines and our booster shots and masking and all of that. And I hope things continue, to keep going up and getting better for us.
From your lips to God's ears, literally. How can our greater community, our advocates, support those struggling with trauma within the intersection, add on more race, gender identity, immigration, economic hardship, to ensure that survivors' voices are heard?
Thank you. It wasn't a custom to go to therapy in my community, in my family. If you were going to see a psychiatrist, it meant that you were severely mentally ill. My parents were afraid of anybody finding out that I was going to a psychiatrist. In the 80s, when I first came out about this, it was very secretive. And so I think things have changed, but I think reducing stigma around getting help is important. If we don't have providers, social workers, mental health providers who are immigrants or people of color or Filipino or whatever, then I would hope that there was culturally competent training around it. Sometimes I've heard things that if I wasn't really motivated to continue with therapy, I might have stopped, because the way that some providers interpreted my family and interpreted decisions we made and who we were, they just didn't understand, I'm not going to cut my family off, unless they were doing big things that were very, very harmful. I do want a relationship. It is important for me to stay connected to my family. I don't have other, as an immigrant to this country or as a Filipino, I don't have a lot of other Filipinos in my life. I'm not going to cut off Filipinos, or my family. But that's kind of what I heard from some people, like, well, they were horrible and you should just never talk to them again. No, that's not an option. Like, they're my parents, and like, I'm going to stay connected to them. So things like that, like having people who can listen and be aware that not everything that works for the dominant culture is going to work for people who have marginalized identities. It's just not. We have to depend on each other for other things too. So I think an openness would be important.
I love what you said. You put it so just matter of fact, and you speak in a way that it's like, you're hitting me with some really powerful themes, but it's comforting. Yeah, you're maybe just the tone of your voice. It's really powerful. Okay, let's change the energy up just a little bit and bring in some audience questions right now. How about that? So we have a couple right here. I'll move through ones. Let's see if we haven't asked already. One person has sent in. What do you think is needed? And you touched on this a little bit, but what do you think is needed in the Filipino or Filipino American community to open up the conversation about sexual abuse?
It is, it's in my community, it's in all kinds of communities. But, maybe there needs to be some kind of formal, organized place or space to talk about this. And I know from my one-on-one conversations with readers that people want to talk about it. They have lived through generations of this kind of silence around family violence, and they don't want to anymore. But I think there needs to be folks who are from our community who are doing the work with survivors, because there's generations of us. So I think people need to feel comfortable and that there's going to be something positive that they take out of it. And from my perspective, just the act of even being together and crying together and sitting with each other, even if people don't get so into the details of their stories, just that kind of act of being together and acknowledging that we have also survived something, I think that is very powerful. So like whatever comfort level people are at, I think we can start, bringing it out and bringing it into the light. There's that quote about, you bring something into the light to burn it, and we can withstand it. We are resilient. Look what we've survived already. We can survive this. And I think this is speaks to the US history. We can talk about histories of enslaved people. We can talk about genocide against Indigenous people. We're strong enough as a country to do it. We don't have to pretend it didn't happen. And we will come out even stronger at the end of it by having those conversations and reckoning with it.
People call it bravery, but it's more than that. Like you said, it's a must to have the conversations, because when you you literally ignore a segment of the population. You ignore a wound that needs to even be acknowledged. So I love that you say that. Here's another question from our audience right now. This is personal to you. Do you feel like you have fully healed, or is there a persistent part that is still unhealed?
Oh, my goodness. I hope, I will spend, I don't know, I guess I spend the rest of my life uncovering the layers and layers of healing. And I don't know that this is special to me as someone with a trauma history. Mm-hmm. I think if you want to live a examined life and to understand your place in it and try to do the most good as possible, I think you continue to examine those layers throughout your life. It's an approach to life. No, I think I've healed in ways that were possible in some big ways. I have a lifetime's worth of work to do to continue this, examining myself and trying to improve and be better in all kinds of ways.
Grace, when I was thinking about your memoir, The Body Papers, number one, first and foremost, where'd you get that title from?
My friend Joanne Diaz, which I think it's like so important to surround yourself with good people, because she gave me that title.
And what did it mean specifically to her, to you?
Well, she's a poet, and so she sees the world in a different way than I did. And she saw my entire book. She's read almost everything I've ever published, and she's the one who had the idea. She's like, I was complaining about not having published a book yet, and she had published 3 by then. And she said, what are you talking about? Like, look at all your published work. And she said, if you put it all together in this particular way, and you call it The Body Papers, and you put some documents and some photographs in between, you have this body of work that's also, The Body Papers describes also like what the project of the book is like thinking about our bodies and the ways that they're informed by, documentation and by all the ways that we interact with policies and the ways we live that. And so she could see it before I could, which I'm grateful for.
Well, and what an achievement. But did you feel like when you went back, when you literally went there and went back to your darkest or deepest memory, was it just like ripping off the Band-Aid, re-injuring the wound? I mean, like, as you started to dredge up and really experience it, because you have to mentally, physically almost go there, what was that process like?
Yeah, I think someone described it as, I think the word is, I can't think of the medical word, but it's the idea of like cleaning an infection. I think it's called deriding or whatever, but it was like another way of cleaning and cleaning more deeply into the wound. And because I have enough experience of myself at this point, and I know myself, I set up support. Like, I knew I was going to have to revise certain parts of the book and rewrite them, which meant going back into that place. And so I put scaffolding in. I know I need my therapist. I need my support groups. I need my friends. I need my husband. I need to see my family and the people I love and cook with them and like do all I put everything in place so that when it was time for me to do that difficult work, I had all of these resources available to me to do, even as little as like, there's this lavender biscuit that I really like at this bakery down the street. So I was writing a part of the book. I was crying the whole time I was writing, but I told myself, I'm like, okay, I'm going to finish 2 hours. And after this, I'm going to go sit in that cafe and I'm going to eat a lavender biscuit. Like, that is what I'm going to do. And so it didn't feel like I was hurting myself. It felt like I was arming myself with the access to the love and resources that I needed to get myself across the finish line of the book, finishing it. Because I can tell you, like, there's many times where I did not have, even when after I signed the contract, I could not imagine my book being in the world. It was too scary. I almost gave up. I'm sure I drove my editor crazy with my, delays, and I just couldn't do it a lot of times. I couldn't do the work. And, it was stunning to me when I finally held this book in my hands, because I just didn't believe it was going to happen.
Yeah. And thank you for, again, answering all these questions. I mean, these are not easy questions. The fact that you have an answer for each one is, I mean, you're brilliant. So back to our audience questions as we wind down this conversation. Here's an interesting one. In terms of missing white girl syndrome, and again, this is from our audience member, how can we as a community support survivors of color as it relates to disproportionate media attention, and what kind of mental health related actions should be taken in terms of response to sexual violence and domestic violence police calls? So you can take a piece of that or all of it. Do you want me to say it again?
No, okay. It's a very specific question, and it's complicated because I think there's so many things to talk about. One is, this thing about missing white girl syndrome, I think is how it was phrased. I mean, we should care about every single missing girl or missing person. But the fact that we see a disproportionate attention to some populations more than others, that should cause us pause right away. But that speaks to something deeper. We have to investigate our internal racism or our own white supremacy within us and how that plays out in reporting. Why is that? So the fact that there's a term for it already is hopeful to me, because maybe we can start to do some work around it if we know there's a disparity there. That's one. We have to do a ton of work around racism. But also, it is complicated, right? Like, you think about this because this is your work. Like, I think about it with my book. Like, what am I going to put out in the world about my community, given that there already is a disproportionate response to seeing them as other, as criminal, as brown people who are immigrants who are causing problems. I had to really think carefully about how I was going to tell these stories, because not all Filipino grandfathers are like my grandfather, right? But if we don't have enough stories about Filipino grandfathers in books, then guess what? My book stands as a kind of representation, which is not what it should be at all. This is a very particular family that I'm writing about. So I've had to think about it because but it speaks to larger disproportionate outcomes of racism and white supremacy in our society. There's not a whole bunch of other books like mine about Filipino families, and there should be.
Well, that's the truth. And you talked about just to balance. My father's father is Filipino, and his grandfather Herman or Jermaine and was awesome. So you're right. Yes. There are different stories out there, and I love the Filipino culture. And thank you for sharing all parts of it. And you are a representation of excellence. So no, I have to just say that publicly to you. I want to. This is a beautiful question that has been put forth, and I think we could all learn from it, no matter what you've experienced in this world so far. Any words of wisdom about how to be gentle with ourselves or one another when working through trauma?
That is a really beautiful question. And the word is right there, is being gentle. And I think self-compassion is incredibly important. And so I do this is my therapist taught me this. I have to do this probably every day. But I think about someone I love, and I think about how I would speak to that person and how I would treat that person, usually a child that I love. And I think about that and I think, okay, would I talk to that beloved child in my life the way that I am talking to myself right now? Mm. And if the answer is no, then I need to think about how I'm talking to myself. It hurts me. It doesn't help me to yell and berate at myself like, oh, why didn't you do this? Or why did you forget that again? You're so, everyone has their own tape that's running in their head about all the things that they do wrong. But what if we can, as a habit, switch that over and like, how would I talk to a beloved child? And to begin to talk to our own selves in that way. And if we make it a habit, perhaps, we'll be gentle with ourselves. And I do believe it'll reverberate to other people because we'll see that beloved child in a stranger. Someone annoyed us, they cut us off in traffic, whatever it is, but maybe we can pause for a moment and have the response that like they are also dealing with something in their life and it annoyed us, but they're also human. And so let's try to recognize that humanity in each other as opposed to thinking of the worst possible, interpretation of that moment.
Grace, you have the perfect name. You really do. Isn't that so fun? I mean, it's cosmically how it's supposed to be because you're extending grace to others. So I love that. Thank you, Grace. Thank you a million times over for this enlightening, for this powerful conversation, for spending this evening with us and having this important conversation. It was an absolute honor, truly, for me to speak to you. We're so grateful for you sharing your experience with us tonight. And the book is called Everybody, The Body Papers. You can visit the BARCC Forum website to learn more about it and to purchase it. Yes, there it is, The Body Papers. Finally, thank you everybody for joining us. If you'd like to stick around for an opportunity to virtually meet with Grace and ask a few more questions that I haven't thought about, because clearly she has an answer that will blow you away. I mean, literally, your soul speaks every time you open up. So I want you to have your chance to speak directly with Grace. Click on the link below to enter the Zoom meeting with where Grace will be. And thank you, everybody. I'm Latoya Edwards. Have a beautiful evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.